Good evening, and thanks so much for coming tonight. For those of you that don't already know me, my name is Andrea Capio, and I am the Deputy Director at the Conservation Law Center. And on behalf of CLC, I'd like to welcome you to Talking Conservation. This is a public lecture series that explores the ideas, people, and laws shaping the future of our environment and our communities. It's great to see you here for our second lecture. We just started this lecture series just last month, and we're excited to be creating a space to talk about conservation law and policy here in Indiana and throughout the Midwest. Tonight's topic asks us to zoom out a little bit and think about things at the federal level and how those decisions shape what actually happens on the ground here in our states and our communities. While much of what we do at CLC focuses on the conservation here in Indiana, that work is always influenced by federal policy. From regulations to funding, federal policy plays a major role in determining what conservation efforts are possible, how effective they are, and whether they can last. We're fortunate to have a speaker with us tonight who's worked at the federal level and can help us understand those decisions and how they affect what happens here locally. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping tips. First, tonight's lecture was approved for 1 CLE credit, which is great. If there's any attorneys in the house, please sign in at the table in the front there, and we'll make sure you get credit. Second, I'm sure you've noticed, but we are being recorded, and so your presence in the room is consenting to being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, let us know. And finally, I'd like to take a moment to thank our series sponsor, the Duke Energy Foundation. Their support has made tonight's event possible. I'd like to invite Kelly Karn, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs and Policy, to provide a few words of welcome.
Thank you, everyone. On behalf of Duke Energy, I would like to thank you guys all for attending and for your interest in this important topic. Duke Energy is proud to support the Conservation Law Center and its legacy of caring for our environment. As you likely know, Duke Energy is the largest electric utility in the state, serving 69 of the 92 counties, including Bloomington. Duke Energy is committed to stakeholder engagement and community outreach. Every day, our teams work hard to make the best decisions possible for the state and for our local communities as we navigate this shared energy future. Along the way, we have supported the Conservation Law Center priorities, like this important lecture series and the Southern Indiana Sentinel Landscape Project, which provides education to landowners regarding land conservation practices. Duke Energy has a long history of supporting environmental conservation issues in Monroe County, including things like volunteer tree plantings, funding the Sycamore Land Trust, and support for the Powell Reserve and the Bean Blossom Bottoms Nature Preserve. We support a cleaner energy future and know that we need to find a balance to ensure that as we transition, we are mindful of the other energy policy pillars in the state, including reliability, resilience, stability, and now more than ever, affordability. At Duke Energy, we're focused on a diverse, all-of-the-above approach that protects reliability and affordability, while at the same time reducing emissions and continuing to attract jobs and investments in our state. We need to be ready, both today and in the future, to reliably serve the increased load due to economic development wins, increased electrification, and our growing communities. For us, that means investments in infrastructure, everything from hardening and modernizing the grid, adding renewable generation and energy storage to our system, and new natural gas generation. We do all of this while ensuring that we do so in a way that protects the environment. Duke Energy also strives to be a low-cost energy provider by holding our day-to-day expenses flat, even in this increasing cost environment we find ourselves in. We also provide our customers options to manage and even lower their energy bill through energy efficiency offerings, low-income assistance, and new time-of-use rates that provide discounts to customers in off-peak hours. We're proud to support our communities not only through the tax revenue we provide, but through our focus on supporting the community needs and through transparent and proactive local engagement. That's why we ensure that in each of our communities, we have a Duke Energy Community Relations Manager, like Liz Irwin here in Bloomington, who acts as your representative to address all of your energy needs. Duke Energy and our predecessor companies are honored to have served Indiana for more than 100 years now, and we look forward to the next 100. We know it's important to our communities to work with a partner that they can trust to balance reliability, affordability, and environmental sustainability. And that's what we do every day. So thank you very much for having us. Now I'll turn it back to Andrea, who can introduce our distinguished speaker tonight.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to the Duke Energy Foundation yet again. We really appreciate your support. While I have your attention, I also wanted to mention we do have another lecture coming up in October, actually. I think it's this fall. Paul Labovitz, the former superintendent of Indiana Dunes National Park, will be speaking about Indiana's Lake Michigan shoreline and how the law protects public access to the remarkable place that we know as the Lake Michigan shoreline. So beautiful there. You can learn more about that at our lecture series website at talkingconservation.org. Now it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Kim Ferraro, the managing attorney at the Conservation Law Center. Kim leads CLC's legal work across a wide range of conservation initiatives and brings deep experience in environmental law and policy to us here in Indiana. Please join me in welcoming Kim Ferraro.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for being here. It is truly my great pleasure and honor to announce or introduce Janet McCabe, who I've had the privilege of knowing for the last nearly 2 decades. I first met her when I was just starting out as a public interest environmental attorney. And I'm sad to say that in those 20 years, we really didn't get a chance to get to know one another, but we did today. And I've really enjoyed that conversation. And I know you guys are going to really enjoy hearing from her. When I first met Janet, though, even though we didn't have that sort of one-on-one connection, she was the executive director of Improving Kids' Environment. I saw her, as executive director, I saw her manage that organization, including grant writing, fundraising, donor development, while all very skillfully advocating for children's public health through developing sound public policy. Ever since I met her, she has been my own personal environmental hero. Even then, as I said, she was doing remarkable work, but before that, she had long started her career. She had leadership roles with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management's Office of Air Quality, including serving as assistant commissioner. Janet's deep expertise in environmental law and her relentless commitment to public health have defined her distinguished career. She was tapped by both the Obama and Biden administrations to serve at the highest levels of the US EPA, including as the deputy administrator, which is the agency's second in command. There, she helped lead national policy on air quality and climate change, including work on the Clean Power Plan. Alongside her public service, Janet has also been a respected educator at Indiana University with roles at McKinney Law School, the O'Neill School, and the Environmental Resilience Institute. What has always stood out to me is her ability to pair serious policy expertise with practical, collaborative approach to solving hard problems. We are very fortunate to have her with us today. Please join me in welcoming Janet McCabe.
Well, that was so nice. And this is really nice. Thank you, CLC, for inviting me to be part of your first lecture series. Thank you, CLC, for doing this lecture series and for the work that you do every day to help preserve wild spaces around the state and be there for people who need help when there are environmental issues. I have to caveat my talk, I really hope I do not bore you tonight or go on too long. But I'll tell you, when I started getting into this talk, which is not my usual, here's what's going on at EPA talk, it's, I hope a little bit more focused than that, I just kept doing more and more and more, and I've got to give them this example and this example. So, so I will try to control myself from going down too many rabbit holes for you, the rabbit holes that CLC works so hard to protect. So first, just a quick note to make sure that you know that tonight I am not speaking on behalf of Indiana University. These are my own views, not the university's. Okay, that is done. So the title of my talk is something along the lines of Connections and Consequences, which is sort of a title that you can use when somebody asks you 2 months ahead of a talk to come up with a title. Some of you may have been in that position. What I'm going to talk tonight about is cooperative federalism. I know there are a lot of law students in the room and others, but just so I can get a sense, how many in the room feel like you know what cooperative federalism is? This is awesome. Okay. So only a few of you will be bored, I think. Cooperative federalism is a very worthy principle, and it has deep roots in our democracy. In the world of environmental protection, it's been an essential approach to the nation's efforts to address pollution, the pollution that our modern society has created. Having worked at the state level and at the federal level, I've been on both sides of the cooperative federalism relationship, and I know it can work to the greater public good. And don't worry, I will explain to those of you that don't know what it is in a few minutes, but not until after I say a few more things. But I know also that cooperative federalism is often in the eye of the beholder. So what I mean by that is when the cooperation is going your way, you feel pretty good about it. When it seems to favor policies that are choices you don't want, it does not seem so cooperative. So I recognize that. I also recognize that any administration's view of cooperative federalism is going to necessarily be within the context of that administration's priorities. I think you know that over the past couple of decades, the country has become much more divided over many, many things, including environmental issues. And environmental issues in particular have become partisan lightning rods. So the term cooperative federalism, which we've used for a long time in the context of EPA, to me, it seems, has been steadily losing its being a genuine term. And we're now at sort of a crisis point of where it has really, really lost meaning. And my point to you today is that while agencies like EPA will continue to use the term cooperative federalism in general, and as they explain certain policies, you should look at what they do, not what they say, and see whether you agree that they are being true to these democratic principles of cooperative federalism. I'm trying to come up with a new term for what's going on, and the two ideas I've had is cooperative favoritism or non-cooperative federalism. And perhaps you will have some other ideas to throw into the hat as well. In the current administration, I believe that using the term cooperative federalism is part of their strategy to do the things that they want to do as an administration: shrink government, deregulate, support the fossil fuel industry, and reject anything that has to do with climate change. To get to the consequences part of my title, the consequences are not just damage to this worthy principle. There are real consequences for our health in the near and longer term. Our present and future health are endangered by these policies that are allowing increased air pollution and actually moving backwards from progress that we've made over the last decades, and in the future by not focusing on the threat of climate change. My point tonight is not to argue the legality or the desirability of any particular policy, although I think it will be obvious where I stand on most of the issues that I will mention. My point is, again, if you see the administration couching something in terms of cooperative federalism, please take a hard look at it. Okay, so let's get rid of all the suspense here. I am not a deep scholar in the history of cooperative federalism or the Constitution. Perhaps there are people in the room who are. But here's a little bit of high-level history. From our earliest days, of course, the question of what authorities the federal government would have in the United States and what authorities the states would retain was a big deal. Anybody who has seen Hamilton knows this to be true, right? My favorite little story about Hamilton is we were in Chicago watching it, and there was a family sitting in front of us, and one teenage girl says to the other, "Which is your favorite Federalist paper?" Pretty awesome. Lin-Manuel Miranda should feel good about that. So the Constitution enshrines the idea of cooperative federalism in a couple of things. The Supremacy Clause, which says that the federal Constitution and the federal statutes are the supreme law of the land. The Necessary and Proper Clause, which says that the federal government shall make laws in order to carry out the government's inherent powers. And the 10th Amendment, which says anything that's not specified in the Constitution or these federal laws and not prohibited is left for the states to be in charge of. And those powers are not taken away. During the 1930s, under FDR and the New Deal, there was a lot of national legislation that was happening. There were big national problems that needed a little bit heavier hand from the federal government in the view of the administration. And so it's sort of the concept of it sort of grew. There's a related concept. You may have heard this very quotable statement from Justice Brandeis: states are laboratories of democracy. He dissented in a case where the court struck down something that a state was doing, and this is what he said. He said, be careful before you stomp on what states are trying to do. One of the classic examples of where a state has been a laboratory of democracy is the Massachusetts healthcare system, which became the model or the starting point for the Affordable Care Act. In the environmental area, perhaps California has been a laboratory of democracy with all kinds of innovative programs. The New England states have been laboratories of democracy with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We need states to be doing those sorts of things and not stomp on them. So I'm going to move now from my brief history lesson about the Constitution to a brief history lesson about air pollution control. So in the early days, we didn't have statutes, and we didn't have agencies and EPA. We had public nuisance and private nuisance and trespass as private rights of action if somebody was interfering with your enjoyment of your environment. Well, as the industry and motor vehicles were creating more air pollution in the country, the important agencies were at the local level. In 1881, Chicago passed the first municipal smoke abatement ordinances, and within a couple of decades, most cities had smoke ordinances. They were they employed people called smoke inspectors who would go around with this kind of a device and look at how dark the smoke was. Nowadays, inspectors go to smoke school. Anybody here ever been to smoke school? It's a great skill to have. In 1947, the Los Angeles Air Pollution Control District was created. That was the first air pollution agency in the US. In 1948, in Donora, Pennsylvania, which is near Pittsburgh, there was something called the Donora smog or the Donora death fog, which was a multi-day incident created by a temperature inversion and emissions from some US steel facilities. It killed 20 people and caused respiratory problems for 6,000 of the 14,000 people living in the community. It was a big deal. People were realizing that things were a little bit out of control. In 1955, the first iteration of the Federal Clean Air Act was passed. Sorry, the print's so small there. I know you want to read it. But it mostly said, wow, air pollution is a problem. The federal government cares about it. But it left most of the responsibility in the hands of the states. In the 1960s, we had this all around the country. We had air pollution, we had barrels in the woods, we had medical waste on the beaches, we had fish you couldn't eat. It was bad. People were realizing that we were really fouling our own nest in ways that needed to stop. We had an oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara, which was dramatic. We had the Cuyahoga River catching on fire, not for the first time, as it turned out. It was the time that mattered, but it wasn't for the first time. And then, of course, we had Rachel Carson writing about the dangers of DDT in a very compelling way that got a lot of people really paying attention to this stuff. So in 1963, the Clean Air Act was amended again, and it came from the recognition that the law in 1955 just wasn't enough, and it authorized more federal funding, but it still was looking to the state and local air pollution control agencies to do most of the work. On April 22nd, 1970, that was the first Earth Day. It was the brainchild of Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin, who teamed up with an activist named Dennis Hayes to make it a national day of teaching. And it focused on students all across the country. Hayes organized campus teach-ins and scaled the idea to a broader public. This was something I did not know. They chose April 22nd, a weekday falling between spring break and final exams, to maximize the greatest student participation. Now, I knew that the academic calendar sort of ruled all, but I did not know that it was the reason that Earth Day was on April 22nd. The 70s was our decade of environmental legislation. It started with the 1969 National Environmental Policy Act, which is the grandparent of our modern environmental legislation, with the creation of the US EPA in 1970, and with its first administrator, our own Hoosier, William Ruckelshaus, great American. In 1970, the Clean Air Act was significantly amended and signed by Richard Nixon. And it really brought this concept of states and the federal government working together on air quality to the modern era. It assigns to the federal government things that really make sense for the national government to do, to set national standards, to set technology standards that would apply, whether the steel mill was in Indiana or Pennsylvania or Ohio, to work to provide a lot of funding to state programs, to do research that state environmental agencies are just not usually in a position to do, to oversee things that are hard for states to do on their own, like interstate air pollution problems, which we have all over the country, right? And to step in when things are a little too difficult, too complicated, too resource intensive for the individual states. What do states do in this partnership? They run the programs on the ground. The Indiana Department of Environmental Management runs most of the air monitoring, and I'm going to focus on air quality, but it's other programs too. They run most of that. They do probably 90% or more of the permitting in the state, the inspections, the compliance. They do plans that are specific to Indiana to help meet the air quality standards in places where Indiana doesn't meet them. And every state has its own unique things. So this is the foundation of the cooperative federalism agreement in the Clean Air Act between states and the feds. There's one other important part of it. Sorry for all the legal jargon here, but the Clean Air Act specifically says states may not do anything less strict than what EPA has put forward. But if EPA has not set a standard for something, or even if they have, states are free to go beyond the federal minimum to take care of air quality problems in their states, if they wish. So it's kind of that parallel to what I showed you from the Constitution. So very, very important part of the Clean Air Act. 20 years go by, we do not make as much progress in this country as the 1970 Act would have hoped that we did. So in 1990, another Republican president signed the 1990 Clean Air Act amendments to make put some more programs in, and you can see them listed here, to set some more deadlines for ozone control and that sort of thing. It also tried to, state permitting programs were very uneven across the country. So the act said every state's got to have at least a minimum quality and appropriately funded permitting program to make sure that stuff is consistent across the country. So that's pretty much the Clean Air Act that we've been working with since then. There have been, of course, swings between administrations over the years. Sometimes the EPA focuses more on aggressive enforcement, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes EPA focuses more on regulations, and sometimes it doesn't. But for the most part, until pretty recently, this relationship between states and EPA has worked pretty well. This is summarizing, again, just those basic relationships, including EPA funding the states for their work. I want to give you a couple of examples of cooperative federalism that really worked. One is a program called E-Enterprise for the Environment. In 2013, states and EPA came together and they said, we do inspections, we do permits, we do data systems, we do monitoring, we do all these sort of on-the-ground things. And if we work together, I bet we can really make those better, more efficient, cheaper. We can support each other. And the states, we have lots of good ideas about needs and about programs that we can do. And it has turned out to be really, really great. So for example, between the states and EPA, they came up with a program called Be Well Informed. It was started in the state of New Hampshire. It's an app that's now available to everybody in the country, where if you're on well water and you have test results and you don't know what they mean, you can go into this app and it will tell you what they mean. Started in New Hampshire. Some states had the ideas, we're giving our inspectors tablets when they go out. This sounds so antiquated now, right? So that they can enter their inspection results right in the field. And then when they get back to the office, they can quickly send it to the company and save all that time and effort. And that was piloted in Arkansas and Maryland, and it has spread to other states. Another program was called the Disaster Debris Recovery Tool. This was something that was used after storms for people to be able to find places to take debris. So these are the kinds of things that started in some little laboratory of democracy in the country and now is making life better for people all across the country. I worked with the Enterprise program when I was EPA, and it really has been quite effective. Another great example is something called the National Environmental Performance Partnership System. You're noticing, I hope that I am avoiding using acronyms. Except for EPA, and I may have used IDEM. I will try not to use any others. This came into play when I was at IDEM in the 1990s, and it was a real revolution in the way the states and EPA worked with each other about their funding. So from my perch on the 10th floor of the state office building in Indianapolis, here's what I wanted to have happen with my grant money from EPA. I wanted my counterparts at Region 5 in their high-rise in Chicago to get on the South Shore train line, to come into Northwest Indiana and to leave on a rock a huge bag of money. And then I wanted them to go back to Chicago. That was not how it worked. So the rules were rigid. We felt like EPA was just about counting beans, and we wanted to do so much more than count beans. So together we came up with this flexible system where a state could come forward and say, our focus for the next 2 years is really going to be on this particular water program and this waste program. Can we kind of combine our grants and spend them the right way? And we found a way to make that work. And so that's the way since the 1990s, EPA and the states have worked on their grants. I don't know how it's working now, but it was a really great innovation, and I think was very supportive of the state partnership. EPA has always expressed its support of cooperative federalism. Every 4 years, EPA has to do a strategic plan with the beginning of a new presidential administration. When when I became deputy, I had prided myself on, for my whole career, being able to avoid human resources, strategic planning, budgeting, grants, and a bunch of other stuff. I was in charge of all of that at EPA, so I got to work on the strategic plan. But you can see through the years, every administration has talked about cooperative federalism. And in fact, if you had not talked about cooperative federalism, you would have gotten the stink eye from the states. So it's definitely been in there. When I spoke to the organization that is it's called the Environmental Council of the States. It's environmental commissioners from all around the country. And just another little Hoosier fun fact, Kathy Prosser, who was commissioner of IDEM back in the early 90s when I started working there, was one of the founders of this organization that is helping states to this day. So I got to speak to them early on in the Biden administration, and I was talking about our relationship with the states. And I compared the EPA-state relationship to one of the world's most recognizable duos. So there are a lot of great partnerships in history and literature, but I think Bert and Ernie are a pretty good reflection of how this EPA-state partnership really could work. So they're good at different things, right? They have different ideas. They each have a strong personality. They get on each other's nerves frequently. They often fight. But when it comes right down to it, they're friends. They have more in common than they have that are differences. They know each other very well. They look out for each other. They know they are better together than apart. And they both want to make Sesame Street a better place for everybody. And so this is my idea of cooperative federalism. So with all this Pollyanna stuff and Ernie and Bert, why am I saying that this concept is pretty much meaningless now? It's not just this current administration. I do believe that over the last few administrations, if things have gotten more harder for people to see eye to eye and more partisan, the term has definitely lost meaning. I'm not a disinterested observer, obviously, but I think a disinterested observer might say, yes, in the Democratic administrations, EPA tended to favor the positions and policies that the blue states wanted, and in the Republican administrations, they tended to favor the policies and actions that the red states generally favored. And let me show you language from the first Trump administration and then from the Biden administration that I think illustrates some of the differences. I know you guys are speed readers, but I'm not going to read this to you. But it focuses on reducing burden. It focuses on the fact that it thinks EPA's relationship and roles need to be rethought. You can sort of get a sense of the language there. The language in the Biden plan, very different. It's about partnership, reaching out, being inclusive, listening to people. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying they reflect a very different view. Okay, now I am going to focus to what's been going on for the last year or so. And I'm going to show you a few examples of how I think this administration is putting its support of the term of cooperative federalism into practice. But first, let me show you the strategic priorities that were announced by EPA about a year ago. They're very different from the strategic priorities of all prior administrations that I've seen. So clean air, clean land, and clean water are in there for sure. But there are other things that I think you would not have seen in an EPA set of priorities. But they are consistent with what we hear, what we know are the commitments, the priorities of this administration, which are to energy dominance, to shore up our existing fossil energy system, to reduce or essentially eliminate the federal government's activity around climate change, and a commitment in here. I would say many of these are priorities that they may be fine for an administration, but they're not really what I would consider to be priorities for the federal agency whose mission is to protect public health and the environment. So this is a quote from Administrator Zeldin from his talk to ECOS, Environmental Council of the States, about a year ago. And you can see, again, there's a very different view about what cooperative federalism means. So in the spirit of watch what I do, not so much what I say, I'm going to give you a few examples of actions that have been couched in the principles of cooperative federalism, but I think they really don't reflect what most of us might consider to be true cooperative federalism. I told you I had a hard time not keeping going in different directions. There's six for your score sheet. So you'll know when I'm getting close to being done. Okay. The first one I talked about is deregulation. In March of last year, EPA announced a major day of deregulation. It said it was going to be looking at 31 different regulations and programs to see if they could be dialed back. These include rules affecting the energy systems, water, air, and land, not just air rules, toxics rules that apply to a whole variety of industries, motor vehicle rules, a number of other things. And when the administrator announced this, he said, EPA will work with, not against states, and assist them to ensure that air quality is protected while growing the economy, including development and expansion of semiconductor manufacturing and artificial intelligence. So he's putting these forward as rules that are going to be helpful to the states and will protect air quality. I guarantee you, from my perspective as a former state air leader, that dialing back on national rules that control air pollution will not help the states. States count on the federal minimum rules that they then don't have to do in order to reduce air pollution that's causing smog, particulate pollution, and toxic pollution in their states. So this is not something that is really going to help the states. The budget. Historically, more than half of EPA's budget, which has in recent years has been about $9–10 billion a year, goes right through EPA and out into the country in the states. A big chunk of that goes into what's known as the state and tribal assistance grants. It's basically the operating grants. That's the money that I wanted EPA to put on a rock in Gary. It's over the years, it's been pretty steady at about $1 billion, so 10% of the EPA budget. Last year, in the EPA's proposed budget, they proposed reducing those grants an utterly staggering 90%, from $1 billion to $100 million. The overall EPA budget was a 54% eye-popping reduction right there, but you can see that they were focusing even more on reducing the share that would go to states. You wonder, how does the administrator explain this in the context of cooperative federalism, where they are wanting the states to take on more responsibility? That's a fine thing, to encourage states to take on more responsibility, but they have to be able to do it. You can see here the language that came with those budget documents, and the message was states can pay for these programs themselves, and many of them are not programs that really benefit the public anyway. I'll note these programs are helping employees at IDEM and regulatory agencies at states all across the country do air monitoring, do emergency cleanup, deal with brownfields, write permits, get inspectors out in the field, all that kind of basic work. Fortunately, Congress did not agree with this proposal and kept the grant at pretty much the same level. The president's budget, which just came out last week, repeats this proposal. All the while, EPA is looking to grant more authority to states. In the last year, they've granted primacy to West Virginia and Arizona to run certain kinds of underground injection well programs. But I really don't know how states are going to be able to manage to run these programs if indeed they were to get such a drastic cut in their budget. And hopefully Congress will not allow this to go through again this year. So I'm going to talk about interstate pollution for a minute, something that very near and dear to my heart. I spent a lot of my life on it. This is an area where the cooperative role between EPA and the states is really important. You can imagine Indiana can do a pretty decent job of dealing with its own in-state sources. But when it comes to Indiana as part of the whole eastern half of the country trying to deal with the smog problem or the fine particle problem, that gets a little harder to do. And you kind of need somebody helping to get all of that organized. And when you have a situation with upwind states and downwind states, you're going to have a lot of upwind Ernies and some downwind Ernies, and you definitely need a Bert who's up to the task of trying to coordinate all of that work and kind of call the balls and strikes in a fair way. So in the past year, we've seen a number of decisions and proposals from EPA that appear to favor those upwind Ernies and leave the downwind ones on their own. So I'm going to give you two examples. I'm going to start with something called the Regional Haze Program. How many people have heard of the Regional Haze Program? Yeah, it's a bit obscure. It's been in the Clean Air Act for a long time. Congress put it in there because, along with Denora and our cities, our national parks and wilderness areas were plagued with air pollution, and the visibility was really impaired. Why do people go to the Grand Canyon? So they can see to the other side. And if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon when it's been foggy, you're bummed out, right? This is why we go to these beautiful places in significant part, is to see these beautiful vistas. They are part of the incredible heritage of our country. So Congress established this long program, the goal of which was to return visibility in those national park areas to pre-industrial levels. I guess if you're Congress, you get to do this. It seems pretty ambitious to me, but that's what the law says. The haze in the national parks is due to the same things that causes air pollution in our cities: sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, particles from big industry, from power plants, from motor vehicles, and that sort of thing. This program, and you can see on this chart, we have a lot of beautiful areas in this country, not so much in the Midwest. We're a little bit of a donut hole there. In the West, there are many, many of these. We now do have a national park in Indiana. We did not at the time that the Regional Haze Program was enacted. This has been a very challenging program to implement, as you might imagine, but it's been impactful. So states had to, under the law, states and the rules that EPA established in 1999, states were required to go and do some analysis. Indiana had to go and figure out, to use a model, how much is air pollution from big sources in Indiana affecting visibility in Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky, in the Great Smokies, and even further downwind, because this air pollution travels hundreds of miles. Then states had to develop plans where they would impose or agree to controls with those industries that met something that the Act calls best available retrofit technology. The largest contributors during the first round of regional haze plans were the coal-fired power plants. So particularly in the West, where they had not already been subject to significant controls under other programs. These were some of the first rules that actually required significant reductions of pollution from the Western coal fleet. Between 2011, EPA took way too long to get all this going, as it usually does. But between 2011 and 2013, EPA was required to act on more than 30 state regional haze plans. And I was in the EPA's Office of Air and Radiation at that time. Regional haze was my life for those 2 years. And to me, it's another example of the really good where the federal-state relationship and cooperative federalism really can shine. First, the analyses super specific, right? Individual plants, individual states. Every plant is different. Millions of different factors in how the plants are run. How old are they? How much space do they have? Are they close to Lake Michigan? Are they close to the Ohio River so they don't have room to put controls on? These are the kinds of things that we want states to be in charge of, working with their sources to figure these things out. But this is a national program. So it's really important that EPA be there to review all of these state plans and to make sure that everybody's kind of looking at things the same way, doing the analysis the same way, and that the sources that are going to have to control, that the expectations are kind of reasonable and consistent across the country. Not identical, because that wouldn't make sense, but a reasonably comparable level of effort and investment. So I felt like that was a lot of what our job was with the regional haze plans. We approved many of the state's plans, but we also disapproved or partially disapproved a number of plans because we felt that the states had not followed the federal guidelines or were requiring less of their sources than the act and the rules required, or that other states were requiring. That's not fair. It's not fair to the downwind states. It's not fair to the people who live in the downwind states, and it's not fair to the industries in the other states, right? So we worked very hard with the states and with their sources to try to work these things out. Sometimes we could, sometimes we couldn't, and we were just in a position of having to say, nope, that plan just doesn't cut it. So a lot of years have gone by since those first plans came through. These are pictures from the Great Smokies. I hope you can see that the skies are clearer, and I could have found other photographs as well. The visual distance, visibility has increased by as much as 100 miles in some western parks. Utilities and others have reduced thousands of tons of pollution as a result of this program, not only improving visibility, but of course improving health for the people who are visiting those parks, as well as the people who would have been breathing that pollution on its way to those parks. So the program is iterative, as I mentioned. The goal is way off in the future, back before industrial times. And we haven't met that goal yet. So states are continuing to do plans. There's another round going on. It's a natural target for deregulation, given the sources that it applies to. It focuses on energy sources, and it is perceived as kind of a heavy-handed national program. It was included in EPA's list of 31 actions, and this is the statement that came along with including it. EPA right now is looking at the regional haze rules to see if they can be made less onerous. It's also reviewing decisions that were made at the end of the Biden administration, or proposed at the end of the Biden administration. And I want to mention quickly just a couple of them. In West Virginia and California, EPA in 2024, early 2025, had proposed to disapprove those plans because those states had not included all of the sources that EPA felt that the rule required them to consider, EPA has reversed those decisions. Even more concerning to me, EPA has either disapproved or proposed to disapprove 2 state plans that go directly to the state's ability to manage their own sources. In Colorado and in Hawaii, the states worked on their regional haze plans, and it included the shutdown of several facilities in each of those states. Some of those were by agreement with the company, some of them were not. EPA has proposed, or in case of Colorado, finalized disapproval, saying, well, the states have not demonstrated that the required closure of these facilities does not constitute a taking under the Constitution. To anybody's knowledge, this has never been offered as a basis for EPA to disapprove a state plan before. And you can see the language that some of the commenters have used, very, very concerned that EPA would insert itself in the state's clear responsibility to plan their own air quality. So again, I'm not going through these examples to argue for or against. I don't know how they'll all be litigated. I don't know how it will come out in court. I'm sharing them to show you that this is not an administration that is adhering to the principles of cooperative federalism that I walked you through at the beginning. Another interstate, so I think I'm up to example number 4, if you're counting and getting tired. The Good Neighbor Program. So you can see air moves around the country, right? And so there are a number of programs that involve focusing on where do reductions need to happen in order to most effectively and efficiently and fairly address air quality problems. Power plants, without question, have been the biggest contributors to this interstate pollution. They're not the only ones, but they certainly have been the first ones to be focused on. And in fact, over time, there have been a number of programs. There's been basically a family tree of regulations, national regulations that the states have implemented or that EPA has helped the states to implement to reduce emissions from power plants. And it has resulted in significant reductions in sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and to a lesser degree, carbon dioxide. But those lines on the bottom, that's why our skies are cleaner than they were when I was a kid. That's why there's less smog. That's why there's fewer ozone action days, and the air quality is not as extreme. This is a great slide that EPA shows all the time that shows that while those emissions were going down, that's the purple line on the bottom that's going down, all these other indicators of economic activity have been going up. I can't do a presentation without showing this slide, so it seemed to fit in here best. So here's that family of, there'll be a quiz later, here's the family of interstate power plant focused rules that delivered the reductions in pollution that you just saw a minute ago. So this has been very much a state EPA partnership, and EPA has carried a lot of the load for the states. It's states' responsibilities to make sure they're not polluting downwind states. But EPA has done a lot of the technical work, has written national programs that are more efficient to implement in order to get to where we need to be. In 2023, EPA issued that latest iteration, the Good Neighbor Plan, and not everybody loved it, but it was the next step forward. And I don't mean to be cute. Not everybody loved it. There was a lot of litigation about it, and some states were and are unhappy about This is another on the list of 31 targets for deregulatory action. And here's what the administrator said in the context of relooking at the good neighbor rule and a couple of specific actions. It is casting the good neighbor plan as a very heavy-handed, one-size-fits-all federal plan. And he's entitled to think that and say that. And he'll have to prove it in court if it comes to that. But it does not reflect a sense of all the states and EPA working together. I guarantee you that the downwind states do not agree with that statement. And they are a considerable number of states in this country. So again, this is not cooperative federalism at its best. Okay, example 5, the California waiver. California. This is maybe one of the best known instances of cooperative federalism in the Clean Air Act. So when Congress gave EPA the responsibility for setting tailpipe standards for cars and trucks and things that drive on the roads, that makes sense, right? We don't want every state to be deciding what the tailpipe standards are going to be for Chevys and Fords and Toyotas. It would be a disaster. Most states don't have the ability really to do that anyway. But when the Clean Air Act gave this responsibility to EPA, California had been doing this for years. California is extremely sophisticated. In fact, we all should be pretty grateful to the engineers in California from decades past who brought motor vehicle tailpipe standards into the modern era. California was overrun with automobiles, and the air pollution there was terrible. And so they had to, before EPA was really doing it, they had to get smart and write these standards themselves. If you Google these pictures, you just can't believe your eyes that that's what it looked like in Los Angeles. These are pretty old looking. These are like before I Love Lucy cars. Remember they're going to California in that old convertible? It's fun. So that's a long time ago. This is 2016 in LA. You know, we don't really even see that in Indianapolis. We haven't seen that for a while, and especially since our power plant started burning natural gas instead of coal. We don't. So Congress said, okay, you're right. Plus there was some negotiating going on. California will be the one state that can write tailpipe standards and other motor vehicle controls. And they can come to EPA under Section 209 of the Clean Air Act and ask for a waiver from EPA from the prohibition of any state doing tailpipe standards. And the waiver is written in a very generous way. It's like if California comes forward and says, hey man, we need this because our air quality is bad and this is going to help, there's kind of a presumption that EPA will grant it. And for years, this was quite seamless. Probably 100 waivers were given to the state of California, issued to the state of California by EPA for things that were very uncontroversial. There's one other cool thing in the Clean Air Act. Well, there's many other cool things in the Clean Air Act, but one other I'm going to tell you about right now. That is Section 177, which says, states, we know we told you you can't do your own tailpipe standards, but if you want to adopt California's, you can do that. And so it turns out a lot of states have done that. States that are interested feel like they need more reductions from their motor vehicle fleets in order to protect public health in their states. And so they have adopted the California tailpipe standards. In recent years, the California waiver has been getting a little bit more attention, increasingly negative attention from some members of Congress, from stakeholders, from others. And in one of his early acts, the current EPA administrator took a very unusual step. he transmitted EPA's recent waiver decisions, so these were decisions made at the end of the Biden administration, to Congress under what's known as the Congressional Review Act. Who here has heard of the Congressional Review Act? A very few people, yes. There's a good reason for that. And so consider yourself lucky. There is no end to the things we don't know about how our government does its business. So I have to give you a brief detour on the Congressional Review Act. I'm sorry. It was passed in 1996. It requires agencies to send their final rules to Congress, to submit them to Congress, and it gives Congress the ability to pass a law obliterating that regulation. And if both houses of Congress sign such a law and the president signs it or the House and Senate can override the veto, then that rule is gone. And in fact, the Congressional Review Act says it's gone forever. The agency can't regulate on that anymore. It's a very blunt instrument. For years, EPA and other agencies have dutifully been sending their rules over to Congress. I think they were even hand-delivered. I think even in the Biden administration, we hand-delivered them. And it was sort of a non-thing. You can see from this chart on the left that for years there were hardly any of these, and certainly hardly any that ended up in a signed law. But in recent years, people have been arguing, not only do they want to use the Congressional Review Act to overturn agency rules, they are arguing that other types of decisions that the agency makes that we might not consider to be rules, like the tailpipe standards, like the Clean Power Plan, those big rules, that those are subject to the Congressional Review Act and should be sent to Congress with the opportunity for Congress to reverse them. And you can see EPA is a favorite target of people thinking that the Congressional Review Act is a good tool for them to have. Now, this is not an administrative law class, much as you might think it is, having sat through so much of it. So we're not going to argue whether a Section 209 waiver for California is a rule under the meaning of the Congressional Review Act, but perhaps this would be a good exam question. What do you think? Maybe? Yeah, okay. But Administrator Zeldin said, I'm going to consider these to be rules. I'm going to send them to Congress. What do you know? Congress passed a resolution saying we don't want these. The president signed them, so the rules are invalid. The waiver is invalid, which means that California's most recent sets of rules don't have that waiver, so they are outside the system of the Clean Air Act. What does this mean? What does it mean for the 17 other states that have adopted the California tailpipe standards? A mess, right? It is being litigated. California and 10 other state attorneys general have challenged this, so we will see. But it is, I would say, another example of non-cooperative federalism. Okay, last example. I don't want to show you that yet. That will spoil my buildup. So last example. For the federal government to sue a state is a pretty big deal. We don't want that to happen very much. It makes people unhappy. It's disruptive. We ought to be able to work things out without the federal government suing states all over the place. And in fact, the Justice Manual, which is a big document that's been around for decades, that tells the Department of Justice attorneys and the U.S. attorneys' offices how to behave and how to conduct their business, has this language in the introduction, which was, I understand, put in there by Ed Meese when he was Attorney General to Ronald Reagan. Is Reagan? Reagan. He's my era my childhood Attorney General, Ed Meese. Anyway, I've suppressed that memory until today. So what does it say? It says we need to treat the states respectfully. We need to try to work these things out. It's a big deal for the federal government to sue the states. So we've had that for a long time. On April 8th last year, President Trump issued an executive order directing the Department of Justice to review and seek out any situations where state laws or programs or policies were contrary to the federal government's policies around energy development and act to stop those states from implementing those programs. And the Department of Justice is working hard to carry out this direction, particularly with states who are working to try to deal with climate change and climate change issues. You notice I haven't really talked about that issue tonight, and I'm happy to talk about it if people have questions. But because the federal government is turning away from any climate change action, a number of states are moving forward with their own programs to do so. So far, to my knowledge, the Department of Justice has brought 5 actions against 5 states. New York and Vermont have each passed something called the Climate Superfund Law, which is, talk about laboratories of democracy. This is so great. The Superfund Law is the national law that says industry needs to pay in to help pay for the disasters that happen when toxic waste escapes into the environment and is abandoned by industry or whoever has put it there, right? So some states are saying, well, that could kind of apply to climate change too. We have companies, the fossil fuel industry, that for years has been making a profit on selling fossil fuels, has perhaps been complicit in suppressing information about the effect that fossil fuels were having on the environment. And perhaps they should be helping to pay for all the seawalls we're now building and all the wildfire suppression and the emergency relief that we're providing to communities after their communities are burned or flooded. And so these are called climate superfund laws. And good for them to be thinking about the things that they need to do to protect their citizens. Well, the Department of Justice has entered into litigation. They're not the only ones trying to stop these things, but they have aggressively entered into litigation to try to stop these states from implementing those laws. States are doing other things too. The state of Hawaii has sued fossil interests for damages for the harm that has been caused and is being caused and expected to be caused in the future to the state of Hawaii, very susceptible to sea level rise and other impacts of climate change. And so the federal government has entered into that litigation as well. The state of Michigan, word got out that the governor of Michigan was thinking about consulting with some attorneys about whether there were things they could be doing in Michigan. And the Department of Justice filed an action to stop them from having those conversations. I am not joking. The court dismissed it right away in a very satisfying opinion. But Michigan, actually, they hired a lawyer. They have gone ahead. They filed a lawsuit. They're using antitrust as their legal theory, which I think is also interesting. I don't know if they'll be successful or not, but the federal government is going to be part of that as well. And then they've also challenged California over their fuel economy rules. So this has been a lot. I realize a lot of detail and a lot of kvetching from me, as it turns out. So I hope not too much. I think back to the beginning, when you hear this administration say, we believe in cooperative federalism, we're doing these things to restore the right relations between the states and EPA, I hope you'll remember a few things that I talked about tonight, or at least remember Ernie and Bert. and look a little harder at what it is that they're doing and see if you may agree with the policy or you may not. But let's not pretend that we're doing things because we care about this relationship when that's not really why we're doing these things. So thank you again for listening to such a long talk. EPA just signed a memorandum of agreement with the states saying, we love you, we're going to work together on all kinds of things. We'll see. Maybe they'll find some things like e-enterprise or the performance partnership agreements that aren't quite so fraught with policy issues to make it really hard. I hope we will have a day where, Ernie and Bert are back together again in their little bedroom, in their little beds, singing together. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to take questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Janet? Yes.
What strategies do you think states could use to avoid the litigation surrounding their climate policies?
What strategies could they use?
To avoid litigation that's coming in?
I don't know. I mean, if the EPA, if the federal government is going to sue a state for talking to a lawyer, I don't know that there's much they can do. I can tell you that there are a lot of very smart legal and policy minds trying to work on these issues, and I don't even know the number of lawsuits that are out there now on all of these things, and I don't think the administration will win every one. But I do think, so I'm just finishing up a semester of teaching climate change law and policy at the McKinney Law School, so we've been talking about this all semester, and it's kind of discouraging because it seems like the states, okay, we'll go down this path. Nope, can't do that. Well, we'll go down this path. Nope, that doesn't work either. Well, we'll try this, and so far, there really haven't been things that have stuck. One of the things, an area that states can be active in that I think is less of a target are the kinds of programs that are going on all over the country that are not as dramatic, perhaps, but are building resilience and building clean energy and building electrification and things like battery storage in their communities, not with big splashy laws, but project by project by project. Indiana last year was second per capita in the country for solar installations, which I think is remarkable, especially because we have a lot of communities that have put moratoria or controls in place. So what that tells me is that businesses want solar energy, cities and towns want solar energy, people want solar energy. So that kind of stuff can move forward and that's a climate strategy and a resilience strategy.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
So I'm just a little unfamiliar with the Congressional Review Act.
Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. It's just a funny question.
When you say that if like a rule is overturned by the Congressional Review Act and that state can no longer pass policy on that rule, is that like if California has a rule on a specific amount for like fuel economy, they can no longer pass a rule on that specific amount, or they can't pass a rule on a fuel economy?
So I didn't explain it well enough. The Congressional Review Act applies to federal rules, not state rules. So, and we don't know exactly what it means because it has been used so infrequently. But the law does say essentially, if this gets passed, agency, you're done on this topic. Now, there's a lot of room in, I'm sure the law doesn't say you're done, but whatever the legalese equivalent of you're done is. But I'm sure there's a lot of space in that to say you can never do a tailpipe standard again, EPA, or you can never do this particular thing. But we will, I think, learn about that because so many more of these rules are being overturned.
It's like a gray area.
Yeah.
We just don't know yet.
Totally gray area. Yeah. Questions? Thank you so much.
Well, don't go anywhere yet.
Oh,
I want to say just a few words before I dismiss everyone. Before we wrap up, just a couple things. I just want to take a moment to thank Janet for her time tonight, for sharing her expertise with us. We're so grateful for the insights you were able to share with us and all the important work that you continue to do to advance thoughtful, humane environmental policy for us and our state and otherwise outside into the country. I do have a small token for you.
doesn't look small.
Just a token of our appreciation on behalf of the Conservation Law Center. So thank you so much for taking time. Also, everyone will hear from me in the next week or so just to get some feedback. It'll be a short survey. Let me know your thoughts. It will make us better. So if you can take a minute to do that, I'd appreciate it. Everyone who does that will be entered to win a JL Waters gift certificate. And we love JL Waters. They're great. Finally, if you did enjoy today's lecture, please do think about donating to the Conservation Law Center. We are donor funded and we do need support from the public to continue the work that we do. So there are QR codes out on the tables out there, or you can go to our website, conservationlawcenter.org, or there's envelopes at the entry table as well if you'd rather give us a check if you're old school like that. Anyway, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being a part of our Talking Conservation lecture series. Hope to see you next time in October for Paul Abovitz. That's going to be amazing. Before you go, there's some excellent food and drink out in the hallway there. So please stick around, grab a bite, take some time together, have chats, and have a great evening. And thanks again to Janet McCabe.